The fox kept returning to the playground fence every morning just after sunrise, sitting in the wet grass beyond the swings with its narrow red face pointed toward the same storm drain opening under the hill. And by the time the groundskeeper finally stopped calling it a nuisance and checked the pipe himself, the truth waiting inside had already turned a normal school week into a rescue nobody in Brookfield would ever forget. Brookfield Elementary sat at the edge of a quiet suburban district where the last row of houses gave way to a narrow green belt of scrub trees, drainage ditches, and the sort of overgrown service paths children were constantly warned not to explore. The school itself was ordinary in all the ways schools are ordinary when nothing has gone wrong. Bright murals on cinder block walls, a fenced playground with chipped blue monkey bars, a patchy soccer field, and a low brick building that smelled of crayons, floor polish, and cafeteria rolls. Parents liked it because it felt safe. Teachers liked it because it was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's names. The staff liked it because routines held the place together. Bells rang on time. Buses came in order. The janitorial closet always needed restocking. Life made sense in small, repeated tasks. Luis Herrera believed in those tasks more than most. He was 57, compact and broad-handed, with a gray mustache and the steady gait of someone who had spent decades carrying ladders, mulch bags, folding tables, and everything else schools always needed moved. Officially, he was the groundskeeper and maintenance lead. In reality, he was the man who fixed door latches before teachers reported them, unclogged roof drains before storms, replaced soccer nets, salted icy sidewalks, and knew exactly which sprinkler head would fail first every summer. He arrived before dawn every day, long before the first bus, because he liked the building in its quiet state, before children filled it, before radios crackled, before lunch deliveries and parent phone calls and substitute teachers and every small emergency that made schools feel like living organisms. That Tuesday in early October began with fog hugging the field and cold dew silvering the chain-link fence around the playground. Luis rolled his maintenance cart along the side path with a leaf blower in back and a coffee thermos balanced on the front tray. The sun had barely begun to lighten the eastern sky. Somewhere in the greenbelt, a cardinal made one experimental call and then thought better of it. He saw the fox before he heard it. It sat outside the far playground fence near the back corner where the ground dipped toward the drainage slope. A red fox, adult-sized, coat thickening for colder weather, white chest bright in the half-light, black forelegs planted neatly like a waiting dog. It wasn't raiding the trash can. It wasn't trotting through on some fox business of its own. It was sitting still and looking through the fence at the old concrete drain pipe that opened beneath the hill under the edge of the schoolyard. Luis stopped walking. "Well," he muttered, "you're pretty." The fox turned its head toward him, ears pricked. It did not run. That alone was strange. Foxes near the school usually vanished the second a human shifted too fast or a car door slammed. This one simply looked at him, then back at the drain pipe. Luis followed its gaze. The pipe was about 2 feet wide, one of several runoff culverts that carried stormwater from the schoolyard hill into the greenbelt drainage line. In dry weather, it was mostly empty except for leaves, bottle caps, and the occasional tennis ball children kicked too far. He had cleaned it dozens of times. The grate that once covered it had been removed years ago after storms repeatedly bent it loose. Since then, the district's answer had been, "It's high enough up the slope that kids can't really get into it." Luis had never liked that sentence. He watched the fox a few more seconds, but nothing happened. No barking, no pacing, no obvious injury, just a fox staring at a drain. He shrugged, kept walking, and wrote it off as one of the small oddities nature offered before coffee had fully reached the brain. The next morning, the fox was there again. Same corner of the fence, same time, same posture. Luis slowed much earlier this time. "All right," he said under his breath. "Now you're making this my problem." The fox stood when he approached, trotted 3 quick steps along the fence line, then stopped directly opposite the drain pipe and looked at it again. That unsettled him more than he liked. Animals are creatures of pattern, but they rarely repeat a pointless pattern in front of humans unless something in that place matters to them. Food, shelter, a den, a trapped prey animal. Those were the sensible possibilities, and Luis tried to stay with those because sensible explanations made for easier mornings. He walked over to the inside of the fence and peered down the slope toward the pipe. The opening was dark, ringed with damp leaves and mud. He saw nothing immediately. No movement, no feathers, no obvious nest, no paw trapped in the lip. The fox whined once, not a bark, not a warning yip, a thin, impatient sound. Luis looked at it sharply. What? The fox flicked its ears and stayed where it was. A first-grade teacher pulling into the staff lot spotted him at the fence and called out, "Everything okay?" "Fox," Luis answered, gesturing vaguely. She laughed in the absent, busy way teachers laugh when the answer does not require them to solve anything. "Cute." Luis did not laugh back. By 8 o'clock, children were arriving, and the school day swallowed his attention. A jammed bathroom stall, a delivery driver blocking the bus lane, a second grader who had somehow lodged a shoe in the lower branches of the sycamore by the soccer field. The fox vanished from his mind until lunch recess, when two boys came running up to say there was a dog outside the fence staring at the hill. Luis went out and saw the same fox in the same place. This time the children saw it too. It stood beyond the fence, tail low, eyes fixed not on the kids screaming with delight at the slide, but on the drain opening beneath them. Every time the noise on the playground rose sharply, the fox flinched and stepped sideways. But it did not leave. Principal Dana Price came out because too many children had migrated to one corner of the fence, and schools treated clusters as potential injury before anything else. "What's going on?" Luis pointed. "That fox again." Dana frowned. "Same one?" "Same one." The principal was a practical woman in her 40s who appreciated nature from a distance and paperwork more than wonder. She watched the fox for all of 10 seconds before saying, "Call animal control if it keeps hanging around. We can't have kids trying to feed it." Luis nodded because that was the correct administrative answer. But as soon as Dana walked away, he looked back at the fox and felt the same small persistent wrongness. It wasn't hanging around the playground. It was hanging around the pipe. Animal control did not come that day, or the next. Budget and staffing and all the usual things kept them one small step behind every non-biting, non-rabid, technically low-priority wildlife concern in the district. The secretary took the message. Someone promised later in the week. The fox came back Wednesday morning anyway. And Thursday. By Thursday, Luis had stopped pretending coincidence. The animal now had a visible routine. It arrived before the buses, it sat by the fence or paced the short stretch opposite the drain. Sometimes it lay down with its head on its paws and stared at the dark mouth of the pipe for long minutes without moving. Sometimes it trotted away into the brush line and returned minutes later as if checking whether the thing it waited for was still there. It did not hunt field mice. It did not circle the dumpsters. It did not try to get onto the playground. It watched the drain. Luis finally mentioned it to the crossing guard, then to the 5th grade science teacher, then to Dana again. Each had the same first reaction. Animals are weird. Maybe there's a rabbit in there. Maybe a squirrel nest. Maybe kits hidden somewhere nearby. All possible, all sensible, but sensible lost ground. Friday morning, a storm had rolled through overnight and soaked everything. The field was slick. Water dripped from the slide platforms. Luis arrived in rubber boots and a rain jacket and found the fox not merely sitting by the fence this time, but pawing at the soil outside the drain embankment and emitting low, rough calls that sounded almost angry. The drain pipe itself was carrying only a shallow trickle. Enough water to murmur over the concrete, not enough to flood. Wet leaves had collected at the lip. One child's red kickball, lost days earlier, sat half-lodged in brush farther down the slope. Luis stood at the fence and listened. The fox pawed again, then stopped and looked straight at him. Then it moved closer to the fence, not fearlessly, but with urgent focus, and made that thin whining sound again. A feeling moved across Luis's shoulders that had nothing to do with rain. He unlocked the maintenance gate at the back of the playground fence, a narrow service gate usually used for mowers, and stepped through with his flashlight in one hand and a long rake handle in the other. The fox backed away a few yards, then stopped. It did not flee. Luis carefully descended the muddy slope toward the pipe. Wet grass soaked his pants to the knee. The drain mouth smelled of cold water, rotting leaves, and the mineral damp of enclosed concrete. He crouched at the opening and shone the flashlight inside. At first, the beam found only wet walls, stuck debris, and darkness narrowing into a long, circular tunnel under the hill. Then something moved. Not an animal shape, not fur, a pale blur. Luis drew in a sharp breath and leaned closer, angling the beam down the center of the pipe. A hand, small, human, pressed weakly against the wet concrete. Luis's whole body went cold. "Hey!" he shouted into the pipe. "Can you hear me?" For 1 second, he thought he had imagined it. Then a thin voice, shredded by echo and exhaustion, came drifting out of the tunnel. "Help!" He lurched backward hard enough to slip on the mud and catch himself with the rake handle. The flashlight clattered, beam swinging wildly. The fox jumped but did not run. Luis grabbed the radio clipped to his belt with hands that had suddenly forgotten steadiness. "Office," he barked into it. "Call 911 now. We have a child in the storm drain behind the playground. Repeat, child trapped in the storm drain." He did not wait for a reply. He dropped to his knees at the pipe again. "Listen to me," he shouted inside. "I'm here. Help is coming. Don't move if you can help it. What's your name?" The answer took too long. Then, "Ben." Luis squeezed his eyes shut for one beat and opened them again. Ben, 3rd grade, small for his age, cowlick that never stayed flat, had been marked absent the day before because his mother had called saying he never got home from an after-school play date. The police had already started looking. Flyers had gone up. Teachers had spent the previous afternoon trying not to show fear in front of the children, and he had been under the school hill the whole time. "How long have you been in there, Ben?" A weak, sobbing breath. "Since yesterday. I got stuck." Luis forced every ounce of calm he had ever used on skittish horses, injured dogs, panicked parents, and flooding boilers into his voice. "You did good calling out. Stay where you are. You are not alone now." He glanced back upslope. The fox was sitting again, just beyond the open gate, body angled toward the drain, watching, not pacing, not whining, watching. By the time sirens reached the school, the entire backside of the building had changed shape. Teachers were pulling children indoors away from windows. Dana had locked down the playground perimeter with the efficiency of someone too frightened to do anything less than perfect. Office staff stood in the hall with hands over their mouths. Parents began arriving before they were asked because news travels faster than policy in a school community. Fire rescue arrived first. Engine, rescue unit, and a battalion chief who stepped out already moving fast. Luis waved them to the embankment and pointed at the drain. "Pipe run under the playground hill," he said. "He's inside. Voice contact. He's alive." Captain Erica Sloan crouched at the opening and listened. "Ben, this is fire rescue. Can you hear me?" A faint cry came back. She stood at once. "We need the utility map and the downstream access point. This pipe has to daylight somewhere else." Luis pointed beyond the greenbelt. "It exits into the storm channel behind the baseball field 200 yards over." "Good." 2 firefighters ran with rope bags and entry gear toward the downstream opening, while others brought gas monitors, saws, and a confined space harness. The school's grounds map was fetched from the office. Dana appeared with it in trembling hands. The pipe ran under the back edge of the playground hill, then curved slightly before dropping into the drainage channel. If Ben had crawled in from the playground side chasing a ball or on a dare, he could have slid beyond the narrowing section where a partial collapse of leaves, branches, and washed-in debris trapped him. There was not enough water to drown him now, but after the overnight rain, there easily could have been. That thought made Luis feel briefly ill. The fox remained at the fence. One firefighter noticed it and muttered, "That the animal that led you here?" Luis did not answer because led was too neat a word, and he was too busy hearing a child cry through concrete. But in his chest, he knew this. Without that animal, he might not have checked the pipe before school started. Another hour of bells and buses and playground noise could have swallowed Ben's voice completely. The rescue took 32 minutes, too long for comfort, miraculously short for confined space work. The downstream access allowed a smaller firefighter to crawl in from the wider end, while another monitored air and communicated by line taps when radio signals failed inside the concrete tunnel. They cleared a jam of branches and trash by hand, then found Ben wedged on the far side of it, muddy, shivering, and too exhausted to cry hard anymore. He had gone in after his red kickball Wednesday afternoon, gotten farther than he meant to, then slipped when the tunnel floor steepened. Branches and storm debris trapped him behind a narrowing choke point. His backpack had jammed sideways, making everything worse. His phone, borrowed from his cousin for the day, had died after one failed call attempt. When they finally brought him out through the downstream end wrapped in a rescue blanket, wet and shaking and blinking against daylight, everyone on the school side of the greenbelt seemed to exhale at once. Dana sobbed openly. A teacher sat down on the curb without meaning to. Louis leaned one hand against the fence because his knees had become unreliable. Ben's mother arrived just as paramedics were loading him into the ambulance. Her scream at seeing him alive carried all the way across the field and into the brick walls of the school. The official version came together fast after that. Police statements, timeline reconstruction, the obvious painful questions. Why was the drain pipe ungated? Why had the old grate been removed and never replaced? Why had nobody heard him sooner? Why had the districts too small for children to enter assumption gone unchallenged for years? There would be meetings, reports, lawyers maybe, new fencing, definitely. By afternoon, district maintenance crews were already measuring the opening for a welded steel barrier. But before any of that, before the policy language and the board-level apologies, Luis walked back to the fence where the fox had waited all week. The animal was still there. It stood when he approached, rain-damp fur ruffling in the breeze, narrow muzzle pointed once toward the ambulance pulling away, and then back to him. "Yeah," Luis said softly, voice rougher than he expected. "We got him." The fox blinked. Then, with the quiet lack of ceremony wild things always have, it turned, slipped through the brush line beside the greenbelt, and vanished into the undergrowth. Just like that. Gone. No one saw where it denned. No one found kits nearby. Animal control showed up eventually to a story they did not know how to document cleanly, and an empty fence line where the problem animal had already resolved itself. The science teacher later suggested the fox had likely heard Ben through the pipe at night when the campus was quiet, maybe drawn by distress sounds, maybe by curiosity, maybe because small enclosed cries triggered a denning instinct or prey response. All of those explanations were reasonable. None of them made the timing less astonishing. In the weeks that followed, Brookfield changed. The pipe got a child-safe grate and warning signage. The hill was fenced until contractors secured every runoff opening on campus. Assemblies were held. Parents were informed. Teachers used words like miracle in the staff lounge and then corrected themselves because public schools do not officially traffic in miracles. Luis did not argue with the word exactly. He just preferred facts. A fox kept returning to the playground fence. It kept watching the same drain pipe. It stayed long enough, loudly enough, strangely enough, that the groundskeeper finally checked. A boy came home because of that sequence. That was enough for him. But on some mornings after that, when the fog still hung low over the field and the school had not yet fully woken, Luis found himself pausing by the back fence before starting the leaf blower. He would look toward the greenbelt and the repaired drain grate and listen to the quiet. Not because he expected the fox to come back, because he no longer trusted quiet quite so easily.